Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us for today's session of Teaching Tidbits. Teaching Tidbits is the brainchild of the Center for Teaching and Learning, which at Hostos is housed in the Office of Academic Affairs. And this is something that we started so that faculty can really share their experiences in teaching. And so it's created to be a very informal kind of chat that we have with our faculty. And we have also on our CTL website, we record these sessions. And so all the sessions that have been previously recorded are on the Center for Teaching and Learning website. The link for that is coming up in the chat right now. So please, I encourage all of you to take a look at that, because we have some really fabulous past teaching tidbits that are focused on smartphones as a reflection tool. We have some sessions there about rubrics. There's just tons of information there. So if you're a faculty looking for some inspiration about what you could do in your courses to improve your teaching, or just to try something new, sometimes we get stale, then I encourage you to please take a look in the CTO website, because all the recordings are there. So my name is Diana Macri. I am the faculty liaison for the Center for Teaching and Learning. And this is my first time doing a Teaching Tidbits by myself. So anything goes today, right? Usually Carlos Guevara is our host, and he is a very different personality from mine. But I'm very excited to be here. First of all, it's Friday. The weekend is coming up, so automatically I'm in a really jazzy mood. And I'm also super excited because of the guest that we have today, which is Assistant Professor Sean Gerrity from the English department. He is one of our new faculty, and all of you in higher education know that these new faculty bring in incredible energy, and they bring incredible creativity to their teaching. And it's such a pleasure, because my personal experience with Sean was when he was a faculty fellow, not a faculty fellow, when he was a fellow, a writing intensive fellow. And when I was creating my writing intensive course, he was completing his PhD requirements. And so he was my writing intensive fellow, and we really formed a wonderful relationship, I hope. Right, Sean? Right?
Absolutely.
And so it's just my pleasure to have him here today. So welcome to your first Teaching Tidbits, my friend.
Thank you very much, Diana. It's great. It's nice to be here, and certainly to be here with you on this Friday. And I'm glad you said this was informal, as I invite you into my nook between my kitchen and dining room.
Mm-hmm. That's how we roll nowadays, right?
Yeah, I've tried to clean up a bit here in the background.
Everything is normal here. Everything is normal. You don't see that. If anything happens in the background, we just do everything is fine over here. So, smoke and mirrors, smoke and mirrors. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started, because really we have a lot of questions, and we're really looking forward to your insight on some of these topics that we're going to cover today. So it's already been a year since the pandemic started and we transitioned to distance instruction. What initial reflections come to mind about your teaching then and your teaching now?
So I thought a lot about this question when I saw it, and then it actually occurred to me that the reason I was struggling, I think, to answer it was that they're not actually that different. The way my teaching looks now and the way it did pre-pandemic, like it's different, obviously, in the delivery method, right? Like it's been all online, but the sort of like the underlying kind of principles and philosophy that guides my teaching hasn't changed immensely. I've always been like very generous with students as far as offering extensions and those sorts of things, and that's been crucial now. And I found that students have been very, I give them the option to be able to request an extension if they have extenuating circumstances or whatever. And many of them have taken advantage of this. I'm not interested. I've never been interested in hearing stories about why they can't get the work done. Right? I trust that they have a good reason, and I don't need to hear everyone's medical history. But it has been eye-opening hearing students. I think in some cases they've wanted to share, right? Like just how disruptive the pandemic has been to their lives, and so coming from that, like hearing the sort of personal stories from students of the difficulties they've had has definitely changed my teaching in certain ways. I think the number one thing is probably that I've scaled everything way back. So the assignments and the requirements and everything are very, I guess I would say like bare bones, but I don't mean that in like they're not sufficient way. I mean it in the sense that I think I and all faculty have had to like reassess our courses and what's absolutely necessary for students to meet those learning objectives. And a lot of the like fun, organic, tangents and things that can be gone on in class have disappeared. I've been teaching exclusively asynchronously, I should say. So it's very, very depersonalized, but it was also a deliberate choice on my part, just because, asynchronous tends to have the be the most accessible online method for students. To get their work done. Our students are so busy with work and family and other things. But it's been strange. It's been very depersonalized, not actually seeing or interacting with the students. But that's, I think, the major thing for me is that I've distilled the classes down into like just the content they need to be able to work on, to get people through the semester and to get them through learning what they need to learn in the class. But a lot is left out using that method. But I think it's been useful in that it's made me figure out, like, I actually understand the courses way better now, having needed to look at the SLOs and like look back at what I'm doing and how everything directly ties into that. To make the most out of the time we have to work with.
Yeah, and I think that also I because I'm in allied health, and so what I do is very, very specific. And so I always think of you guys in the gateway courses, right? That's why they call them these gateway courses, that you guys have so much more of a responsibility, not responsibility, but so much more of like a pressure to really be a little more touchy-feely, for lack of a better word, with our students, because what they really need is compassion. Those of us, I like how you said to get them through. Right, like hang in there, guys. Things are going to be better. Like we're just going to get through this together, and we're going to do it together. And I think those of us who do that, kind of comfortable with ourselves and our emotions, and can open ourselves up. I think, especially for those of you in those gateway courses, I suspect, is that true? It's helped a bit.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's always been. I've always placed like a lot of importance on that. The role we play as faculty in gateway courses, because I'm on the Senate Admissions and Retention Committee, and so like issues of retention are huge at community colleges in particular. Issues of retention are huge right now at Hostos and across CUNY, and so yeah, like being that one of the first points of contact for a student who comes to Hostos, especially during a pandemic, learning online. Yeah, and I think we have a big role to play in fostering their desire to stay and to see their courses through and to register next semester. And I'm sort of happy to do that, as you said. Like that's something that that's always been woven into my pedagogy, is really like taking a personalized approach to working with students. Talking openly about my own personal life and like trying to humanize myself to them and connect to them as much as possible. But it's gotten overwhelming, certainly, right? And I think like at a certain point no amount of like calling students, emailing students, making yourself available, like at a certain point there's diminishing returns on the mental health of the faculty and on the students. And I think one of the hardest things for a lot of faculty has been sort of accepting the fact that there are some students who are not going to make it through the course, right? That's always disheartening, and it's always something that you like try to avoid at all costs. but right now it's just a reality, I think, right? There's some students for whom not trying to take their 5 courses and work their full-time job and take care of their 3 kids, that it's just not going to work. And I've had conversations with students like that and referred them to their success coaches and to the counseling center, to really make an assessment of what's the thing that I can drop out of my life right now so that I can function. And in some cases that's been dropping a class, or it's been, calling it quits for the semester. And I think that's very understandable, as difficult as it is to see and to admit, like, to ourselves and for students to admit to themselves. But yeah, I mean, it's been, I think I've gotten a little more comfortable with that fact, like accepting that also that, students are aware and mature enough to make decisions about these things for themselves. But, I'm of course willing to work with them as much as possible to make plans for success in the classes. But, sometimes it's just not going to happen. And it's very hard to accept, but it's been sort of necessary, I think, as this has gone on. Because I haven't seen things get better. It's not as though students are I think they're used to this now in some ways, but I haven't seen like performance increasing. If anything, it's been harder. I think that the more this has gone on, like it's just like a compounded trauma. And I think sometimes we have this expectation that students will be used to it, but it remains just as. I've tried to remain attuned to that fact that this is just as much of a crisis now as it was, a year ago. It looks a little bit different, but the long-term health effects and the effects of the trauma are here, and they've like snowballed into each other as opposed to being alleviated.
Yeah, for ourselves and for our students, because I always think of I've always compared teaching and learning to dancing, right? You can't be a good dancer on yourself. You can only be a good dancer if you have your good partner. And so I always tell my students when things are going well between us, I'm like, okay, we're really dancing really well. This tango is going along really, really nicely. But then when one of that partner, either the teacher or the student, is weakened in some way, and it has happened to quite a few of us. I mean, I put myself definitely in that category of, yeah, we're fine, everything's fine, keep moving, and then all of a sudden you feel it, and you have to recognize that the important thing, and I tell my students also, is to recognize exactly what you just said, that, what, at this point in my life, this is not doable. It doesn't mean it's not doable for the next time, but at this point, instead of continuing this cycle of trauma that we have, I have to put an end to it. So,
Right.
So tell me, how has all this changed your teaching? So what you mentioned that for the most part it stayed the same, but I'm certain some things have been different. You talk about how being you went down a little more bare bones with your teaching. So what does that look like for you? And also moving forward, knowing what you know, because I don't know, are you in asynchronous next semester as well?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how is it going to affect your teaching for moving forward?
Yeah. I mean, so I've always been someone who likes to experiment with new and different, technologies and softwares. Prior to the pandemic too, the technological stuff has always interested me. But that, also just a lot of pedagogical experimentation. And the way that's changed now is I've realized there was this like frantic rush early on in the pandemic when we moved to distance learning to like, I think everyone felt as though they needed to like build these great online classes, and like the resources were thrown at us like, until we were drowning in them. And I don't mean that in a negative way. Like it's a reaction, right, to the suddenness and the abrupt shift, is to try to like utilize collective resources. But I think like what I finally settled upon by the end of that spring 2020 semester was that, and this is a change I think that I'm going to use next semester still, and always keep in mind, is that thinking about the amount of time it takes me to learn these new and different technologies, whether it's like group annotation technology or different
Padlet or all these little things that look so easy, and then you go and do it, and 3 hours later you.
Right. And so thinking about that, right, like thinking about the amount of time it takes me to figure it out, and then thinking about assigning it to the student who has 4 other classes and 4 other professors throwing all different types of new things at them, it's overwhelming. And so I've really fallen back on Blackboard, which I have kind of a love-hate relationship.
I was just going to say love-hate, yeah.
Many of us do, right? I think Blackboard catches a lot of flack, but it's a robust learning management system. There's a lot that it can do, and that I've learned about, I think, on the back end now, in particular with the Grade Center and whatnot.
Yes, which the students love, by the way, because when I set up that Grade Center to be just right, when I take the time in the beginning, they love to see how they're moving along. It is a motivator for them, for sure.
Yeah, that's a big thing we've talked about in the English department is communication and transparency with students. It was a theme of a professional development we had that I participated in and organized part of. And yeah, that's been really important. And Blackboard provides that. I've leaned very heavily on Blackboard, and also just on like as few as possible of like predictable types of assignments due each week. So just like, discussion board. I used to do lots of things with journals and with all sorts of other things on Blackboard, which I've stopped for now.
Yes. By necessity. Same here.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, right? So the discussion board has been like the primary emphasis of the course, and it's worked well because students know like that's where like I've got my reading and whatnot, and then the discussion board is where I'm going to go to do my writing for the week. And so I've very carefully gone and sort of scaffolded all of my writing assignments to be things that are submitted via the discussion boards. So like a rough draft of a paragraph, and then they get feedback from me, and they get feedback from each other. And all of this stuff like folds its way into an essay that's due. And the feedback from students on that has been very positive, like that they know what to expect. And I think that any amount of knowing what to expect in a horrifically uncertain time is useful for them and for me, like you were saying too, right? Like we have to acknowledge the effect this has on us. And so I've been very open with students about having the baby and all the responsibilities, and like, many of them have kids, and so we've been able to like bond over that and commiserate over that with one another, which has taken the place of some of the informal interactions we would have had in the classroom. But that's, and I think this has forced me to see that kind of scaling down can be a good thing all the time, right? That it's not always there's a pressure we put on ourselves, I think, as junior faculty to kind of perform this like massive competency across all of these different, schools of pedagogy and stuff. And this has been a reality check, I think, in that sense that, sometimes it is better to keep things a little bit simpler.
Keep it simple.
Yeah.
And we get so excited. I think I know from my end, I tend to get so excited. I'm going to try this, and I'm going to try this, and I'm going to try that. And it's going to be so great because the research on this is coming back that this is great for you guys. And then you implement it. And the even more frustrating is that all that takes time. You have to try it once, and you have to tweak it, and then try it again, and then all that alchemy. I'll call it alchemy. It just takes so much time to do. Patience on the faculty's end. Absolutely,
yeah. And I don't want to ignore your other question. So the strategy that I've used, or approach that I've used that's new, that I should have been using all along, was really working intensively with our fantastic librarians at Hostos. Who, I've always I've understood that they're there. It's another one of those things where it's like you don't realize how useful they are as a resource until you finally utilize them, and because it's we're all pressed for time. But this semester I have worked a bunch with Haruko Yamauchi from the library, who's just amazing.
Yes.
And she, I think this is useful for all faculty to realize, is that not only are the librarians really helpful with helping design. So I've been using Haruko, and I've been working on my research assignment for my English 111 course. She's built a whole site for the students, like a whole library guide site that's specific to the research project. which is on a novel called No No Boy by John Okada. It's a novel about the Japanese internment. So that's been great. But not only that, Haruko in particular is really, really good at helping people hone their actual assignment, right? So, even if the librarians aren't content specialists in your area, they're very, very good at knowing what kinds of research prompts and assignments are going to generate what faculty are actually looking for. Yeah. So I have to give an immense amount of credit to her for helping me actually shape the questions and the focus of the paper itself. Yeah. So that there's less of a mismatch between what I want and expect and what I get. So yeah, that's been working with her has been fantastic, and this is an assignment and a guide that I will use, hopefully for years going forward, and just like tinker with and adapt. So I really wish I had done this with her sooner. But
I have to agree with you that the librarians are an underutilized resource that we have here, and all of them are like that. All of them are like that. So Jorge Matos has helped me quite a bit in my, Linda Miles, of course, is like my hero. It's funny because you don't know that you don't know, and then you talk to them and they tell you, and you're like, oh, you could do that? I didn't know you could do that. You're like, I was going to do this myself, and now you could do it for me, and you become so grateful.
Yeah, that's very much what it is. Like I didn't realize, it was one of those things where I felt I have so much on my plate. How can I possibly work with anyone else on any other thing? But then
here they come with their capes, right? Like they're superheroes. They're like, I'll save you.
Right. And that's very much how I felt, because this semester, it was just, I was going round and round trying to figure out, how to design a research assignment, and also like a research assignment that takes into consideration the situation around us, right?
Yeah.
So it can't just be the way I would have done it in a previous life or previous semester. It has to take into account the challenges students are facing now. So again, that like back to basics kind of simplicity, right? Like here are a couple types of sources, right? Here are ways to access them.
Yeah, and that segues us perfectly. Like I'm gonna jump on in with that third question, because that just segues us perfectly into how the differences that you've seen in our students. What is the differences now compared to when we started, and compare that even to before the pandemic, because that's a huge part of why we have to change our pedagogy right now.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing I think I've seen is just that like a lot of the challenges and struggles that our students face have been amplified immensely. A lot of them the challenges were already there, and have just been worsened immensely by the pandemic and like the conditions it's created more widely. There's definitely a sense of like collective trauma amongst students. Just like the sheer amount of sickness and death that I've heard about from students is overwhelming for me, and I can't imagine how it is for all of them. Right? Students who've lost multiple family members throughout the duration of this, right? I don't know how they've continued on. Yeah. The resilience level there is through the roof. But I think, the main things I see from students right now are just an enormous level of exhaustion. Are really a kind of, I've asked students a bunch of times in discussion boards to reflect on like how they're doing, which they've appreciated. And a lot of what I've heard is just that everyone is just sort of like on autopilot at this point now. They're just trying to make it through the semester, and be, get done what they need to get done, and are laser focused on that goal, which is great. But a lot of it is like inertia, I think, that's carrying people through at this point, right? Just like, and in some ways, I think, for some students, it's valuable for them to, the classes keep them, like, as it's a predictable thing, it keeps them grounded. It's something to focus on outside of the trauma. And that's been something that I've been trying to be very attuned to as well, right? Like not generalizing about students, right? Because I'll get some students who tell me their semester's great. It's going fantastic. They're able to concentrate better at home. You have all ranges on the spectrum of how of how students are doing. And so, I've tried to be attuned to that and to like design what I'm doing to cater to students who are in all those situations as much as possible, right? It's not easy, and a lot of that has been through asking them, to let me know how they're doing, and by and large, that's been very well received. And I think that's a commonality I've seen with students. That's sort of always been largely very open to like talking about how their real lives are impacting their ability to function as students, right? And I think, I never ever remember being asked or having that addressed as a student ever.
Yep.
The notion that there's an outer life beyond classes, and so I think that I've always tried to model that, or to be that as a professor, to be open and available for students in that way, and in like a genuine way, and they've appreciated it. A lot of students have said, like, you're the only professor who's asked us how we're doing, and that's very depressing to me to hear.
Yeah, well, it's what I said to you in the beginning, and I really think that it has to do with those of us that are really comfortable with our emotions to go out and say that, because I do understand some professors, some faculty that are like, look, I'm not trained to deal with whatever it is that comes back to me when I ask the question, how are you doing? And you're going to come back to me with something heavy duty. Right. How am I going to? I wanted to give a shout out to, and Kevin is going to post this link for all of you who are watching us today. Next. I think this is Friday. I forget which day of the week this is. Forgive me. It's April 23rd. Okay. The Behavioral and Social Sciences Department is hosting an event. It's from 9:30 to 1 o'clock. It's called Teaching Meets Wellness. And the title of the mini conference is Using Trauma-Informed Approach to Improve Academic Engagement and Self-Care. Because I imagine that, like I said, some of us who are very comfortable with this, we ask and we extend ourselves, but it does become exhausting, number one. And then number two, sometimes faculty are not aware of how to approach that. Like, how do I want to ask my students how they're doing. I realize it's important, but what is it that I need to know? What can I say? What can I not say? Remember, not too long ago, we had these trigger words that we had to be aware of, right? And so coming from that, into asking my students how they're doing, and you get all this information and you can't help them. Sometimes they say things and you can't help them. You feel like it's happened to me. So I encourage all of us to attend that. I can't wait to see it. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I don't blame faculty either. I've tried to be just very, very I accepting of everyone and how they're doing in their situations. Because it's unreasonable to expect all faculty to just be completely emotionally available to their students, right? It does definitely fall outside the purview of most of our jobs. And I will say, though, that I think I've become much more in touch with the college's resources and how they all, like student resources, and how they're all interconnected. The One Stop, the counseling center, the student success coaches, how all of those things can work, ARC, how they can work in concert with one another to support students, right? Because I feel the same way. At a certain point, some of the things students have told me, I've been like, whoa, okay. Let's give you the information and see if you want to reach out to the counseling center or something to talk about that. Because I'm certainly not gonna, like you said, I'm not gonna take on the hat or role of counselor or therapist or something here. That would be very bad. And so we have professionals who are very adept at that, and so that kind of thing, bringing together like faculty and pedagogy, and the trauma-informed pedagogy thing is something that I'm very keen to learn more about. Absolutely. There was a fantastic post about it from someone at the Graduate Center on a blog the other day that I'm trying to track down again. But yeah, that's huge, I think. And I've definitely shared with students more this semester than ever, like resource information, and had one-on-one conversations about, because a lot of students, especially they're newer, my students are mostly first or second semester, they don't know about a lot of the resources that are available, because how would they, especially since this has been online the whole time for them. So yeah, I feel better about that. I feel more prepared as a faculty member now, knowing like here are the other student resources we have that I can direct them to when I'm not able to address their needs.
Yeah, I think that it's important. It's a horrible time in the world, really, all going through this. But I think that 10 years from now, I relate it very much to how we refer to 9/11, right? Like we went through it, we suffered through it, we grieved through it, we went through that process, and we did come out, as a community, my own community here where I live in Staten Island, we did come out, learning a lot of things, valuing each other, being happy for the things that we have in our daily lives and things like that. And I anticipate that the same will happen at the end of this. How are you, this was a question that I wanted to ask because one of the things that our students are not asked to do, rightfully so, was to evaluate their faculty. So you know how we had the student evaluations that they completed at the end of the semester. So I wanted to ask this question because I still need that feedback from my students. So I created this Google form that I do a course assessment. So are you capturing any kind of this feedback? Officially, the college is not doing it, but how are you capturing your students' feedback or evaluation of your teaching?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the Google Forms idea is a great one, which I'll probably steal from you in the very near future. But I've largely just been doing it through Blackboard. Like you can create a forum where students can post anonymously.
Perfect.
Which, like a public forum where you can post anonymously can be dangerous potentially, but it's been very generative for me. And most of the time, like I asked students whether they wanted, they could post anonymously or they could post with their, with their under their name, and the vast majority of students chose to just post under their, to not be anonymous. And I've gotten very good and honest feedback from many of them, and I don't really know how I've managed to get them to trust me enough to do that when we have never seen one another.
It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing.
So yeah, I mean, for them to give me constructive criticism during the semester is huge, and not something that I take personally. Like students have told me, for example, they've told me positive things, certainly, that they appreciate the pacing, they appreciate the clarity, they appreciate the predictability. Yes. Everything's due on the same days at the same times every week. I send email reminders at the same times on the same days every week. They've appreciated that. And then other students have told me, like, this short story was really, really hard to understand on my own. Yes. Like, this is the kind of thing that I think would be way better in an in-class discussion. And I take that to heart, right? Because, the story that I've taught 100 times feels to me like I could recite it in my sleep. And, students have told me things like, the deadline, this was a little quick, like it was hard for me to get this done on time. Because I had some quick turnaround for assignments early in the semester. I like students to get grades on the books early on. So they have a sense of how they're doing. But, so I've taken that to heart, and I've actually made changes on the fly based on student feedback. Like I've pushed an assignment due date back a week, right? I think students think that faculty are much more invested in that than they are. Yes, I have no problem pushing an assignment due date back. Yes.
And then one student suggested, and you're like, absolutely, no problem. And they're all like almost crying, so grateful. And you're like, well, why didn't you just ask me that in the first place, Yeah.
Right. It's not nearly as big of a deal as I think they think it is. And in some cases, their feedback it's made me think to myself, yeah, like I could use that week too, because I have to grade these things and do these things. Like, staggering assignment due dates is actually useful so that you're not grading 100 essays, right? I mean, 100 essays that are 5 pages each, 500 pages. I mean, it's 4 times a semester. Right? It's not like it's...
I don't want to do this. I'm doing it for you. I tell my students, I'm doing this for you, for your development and for your growth. I had a friend of mine, I was having a chat with a friend about something else, but he made a comment that stayed with me. It's been about a week since I talked to him, and it stayed with me. And he said, God isn't change. And he gave me a quote on somebody, and I forgot what that quote is. But it's this idea as a faculty that, I don't want to be teaching the way that what my course looked like 5 years ago, I definitely do not want it to look that way. You know, there's no way that it could have been so spectacular. And especially with what we're going with COVID, please, by all means, tell me, especially since in the fall, I like you, will also be teaching my oral pathology course asynchronously. So I don't want to make the mistakes that I did before. And, you know, I do think, and I give you credit, because I do think that has a lot to do with, once again, you know, you were doing a nice dance with your students, you have a good partner, and all of it, all that kind of goodness comes from trust. Trust was generated there. So kudos to you, because it's not an easy thing to do in an online environment.
No.
All right. If you were able to go back to when we started this transition, what would you do differently?
That's a very good question. The first thing I would do is disabuse myself of the idea that my online class would replicate my in-person class. Like that I could somehow make the online class be the in-person class, but just online. Because that's fundamentally impossible. And it's actually like a bad goal to work towards from a pedagogical standpoint, because the modalities are, like, you can I think you can accomplish the same things through them, but not in the same way exactly. I struggled a lot with that, I think, early on, being like, how can I create continuity, right? Especially because we went to distance learning abruptly. So it was like, how can I create continuity between the in-person experience and the online experience? But the online experience always had to be something very different. And accepting that sooner would have been useful to me, I think, rather than like flailing about trying to figure out, like, how can I make this be exactly the same thing? Because it's just not possible. And to return to what we were talking about before too, also just dialing back experimentation, and just instead like picking the basic things that students largely already know and just sticking with them. I really think you can do more with less. You can do a lot with a little. I'm a big believer in English classes as well, that you can, you know, do a tremendous amount with a very short text. So that's something I probably also would have done different, would be changed up some of the, like, probably get rid of the novel, like making students transition to distance learning and then read a novel, a very depressing and like a novel full. That was a lot of the feedback I got from students, is they were like, I didn't really need this right now. And I thought to myself, yeah, I 100% agree. But I don't want to read a novel. It was Octavia Butler's Kindred, which is it's an all-time favorite of mine. But it's about slavery, and it's a very violent and disturbing book. And I just wouldn't have taught it. I would have just cut it. The problem is that the students had already bought it, and so I felt you know, there was an obligation there to see things through. You know, maybe I could have taught, you know, selections from it or something.
But there's so many beautiful things, you know, and this is what I like about COVID. Like, it just opened up the door. I love how you said that, you know, let's get back to the nitty gritty. In its essence, that teaching and learning, I've always loved, when I first came to Hostos is when I really started getting into all this, you know, and I always loved the concept of teaching and learning, right? Like it's not about me. It's about, and guess what? From the student's perspective, guess what? It's not about you either. It's about us together. And so that's a very intimate kind of relationship. And so if you break it all down, like, I used to love to talk to, and I still do, Jackie DeSanta, right? She's in the education department. And, you know, she'll say this and that. And I realize that there's still so much that I don't know about the teaching and learning thing, you know, but I do know this one thing. And I do know that I know stuff, and I want to share. I'm getting chills as I'm saying it. I know stuff, and I want to share this with you. And I want you to love it the way that I love it. But I'm completely open to giving this to you in a way that you can receive it. Because in the end, what I'm interested in is this relationship being a successful one. So I'm going to ask, you know, we're going to go, I told you this is going to go fast. Look, we're like almost done here. This is like the end of it. And your beautiful daughter has been so good about this.
Yes.
So I'm going to give you one more question. What is it that you need from the administration? That's a good English, from the administration to create innovative, adaptable, and culturally sensitive courses? Because for me, that's my focus now. My focus is these students need us to really talk to them more than ever on the level that that they can receive it, for them to receive it. We're at a distance. We already have these challenges that we have. So what do you need from the administration in order to create these beautiful courses that you envision in your mind?
Time and money.
Don't be shy, Sean. Go ahead and say.
No, I mean, I joke in part, but I mean that is really those are really the major things, right? And there are a lot of things like that the college already offers. I just saw another email this morning about there's an OER, like an OER program where you can get paid a stipend to develop an open educational resources course,
yes.
And then like deliver it in another semester. There's a lot of those things floating around at Hostos.
Did you see Amy Ranson's the grant that Amy Ranson got about creating courses that are going to be given with other countries in conjunction with other countries? No. Oh my God, spectacular! I'll forward it to you. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
no. That's the kind of stuff, right? These things are out there. I think it's very hard. It's very hard to have the mental space and bandwidth to try to do these things right now, without some kind of extra support. But there are a lot of those things floating around at Hostos, whether they're just Hostos or they're CUNY or they're external grants. And I think those are huge, right? To be able, to give folks the time to think about these things, right? That's like the number one thing is you can't just pull these things out of thin air. And you can't create them out of a situation of immense stress and pressure, right? There are things that need to be thought through carefully, right? And considered in collaboration with other folks, right? I think that the best things always come out of that, faculty collaboration, especially across departments where, folks are doing very different things. I do think like some kind of what you were discussing before we got started here, having a committee or having a working group on campus to address in particular like the culturally sensitive courses notion, right? There's an organization on campus, the name of which escapes me right now, that Charles Rice Gonzalez is heading up on including more LGBTQ writers in our curriculum. And that kind of thing, is great to get folks to reflect on, like, let me take a look at my syllabus and see, like, what kind of representation do I have here, right? And in some senses, I think that's like the bare minimum that faculty should be doing, right? It's like including, a multitude of diverse voices and diverse perspectives in the content of their syllabi. And this is very possible across disciplines. It was Charles and it was AJ from the math department, whose last name I can never pronounce correctly. Stachalik. AJ had an absolutely fantastic presentation that destroyed the notion that you can't include these types of conversations and foreground, like what gets lost in thinking of gender as a binary and things in math classes, right? His presentation on that was just really, really eye-opening. And so giving those folks more ability to have access to plan things and get in touch with all of us as faculty is huge, because I think, it was a great example of people on campus who are already resources in this way, and have the expertise to be able to talk to faculty and workshops or whatever. That this is all possible in any discipline, from English to math to whatever. And so not just the gender and sexuality angle, but also the race, ethnicity angle, the angle of disability. There's a disability inclusivity type committee going on now, also at the college. I heard about it at the Senate yesterday, which is great, right? So it seems that there's more attention being given to these things now. There are always things that I've paid a lot of attention to in my own teaching. Presenting diverse arrays of writers and stuff. diverse across various axes. But yeah, so time, money, and access to the people who know what's what already, of which we have very many of those people around. Yeah, I think those are the main things.
Me too. I couldn't agree with you more. That was such a beautiful, positive, wonderful way to end our session today. Thank you so much for joining us. She was magnificent too. I really felt I loved her ideas and her thoughts as well.
You can hear them coming out now. She's very passionate about inclusivity.
I was telling her she was agreeing with you. She was totally mimicking. She wanted to be part of that conversation. I see your pooch there too.
Yeah, everybody's here in the background, the peanut gallery.
Thank you so much for joining us, Sean. Have a beautiful weekend, and thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Thank you so much, Diana. It was a pleasure. And thank you to CTL and Kevin and Carlos and Luz and everybody else there. Have a great weekend.
Bye, everyone.